Hello, everyone. My name is Evelyn, and I'm 42 years old. For most of my life, I've been what you might call the quiet one in my family, the steady, unassuming presence in the background. I'm a city archivist, a keeper of old papers and forgotten stories, a job my family has always treated with a kind of polite bewilderment, as if it were a quaint but ultimately useless hobby. In their world, a world dominated by my uncle, the real estate magnate Richard Finch, history was something to be bulldozed to make way for the future. They saw him as a titan, a modern visionary building a legacy of glass and steel. They never imagined that the quietest person in the room, the one they'd dismissed for decades, was about to use a 100-year-old piece of paper to bring his grandest vision crashing to the ground. They had no idea that the very history they urged me to forget was about to become their greatest nightmare and my sweetest vindication. Before I dive into the story of how a dusty document upended my entire family and taught me the true meaning of power, I'd love to know where all of you are watching from today. Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever felt underestimated or had your passion dismissed by the people who should have been your biggest supporters, go ahead and hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. For all the new viewers here, make sure you subscribe to join our community of storytellers and survivors. Now, let's get into it. What would you do if you discovered that the one thing your family mocked you for was the only thing that could stop them? My family's worship of Uncle Richard wasn't a recent development. It was the bedrock of our entire social structure, a faith passed down through generations. He was my father's older brother, and he had inherited the family's business acumen in what everyone considered its purest, most potent form. Our great-great-grandfather, Alistair Finch, had been a formidable industrialist, a man who built his empire from grit and foresight. A stern, black-and-white portrait of him hung in my parents' dining room, his gaze a permanent fixture of judgment and expectation over every family meal. Richard, everyone agreed, was Alistair's true heir. He didn't just run a business, he conquered skylines. He was loud, charismatic, and dripping with the kind of confidence that comes from a lifetime of uninterrupted success and adoration. My father, a successful accountant in his own right, basked in his brother's reflected glory. My mother, a woman who prized appearances and influence above all else, treated Richard's every pronouncement as gospel. And then there was me, Evelyn, the archivist, the keeper of the past in a family obsessed with the future. My work was quiet, meticulous, and deeply meaningful to me. But in the loud, glossy world of the Finches, it was an anomaly. It didn't generate wealth or headlines. It was seen as a dusty, solitary pursuit, something a woman did when she wasn't ambitious enough for the real world. I remember one Christmas, when I was in my late 20s and had just been promoted to a junior archivist position. I was buzzing with excitement, trying to explain the thrill of discovering a collection of letters from the city's first female physician. Uncle Richard had listened with a patient smile, the kind one gives a child explaining a particularly intricate sandcastle. He'd clapped me on the shoulder, his hand heavy and patronizing. "That's nice, Evie," he'd boomed, his voice filling the room. "Someone's got to keep the old stories. Me? I'm busy writing new ones." The whole family had laughed, a warm, complicit sound that made my excitement shrivel and die. It wasn't malicious, not exactly. It was worse. It was a complete, unthinking dismissal. This dynamic was crystallized at the family dinner, where Richard unveiled his magnum opus, the Argent Tower. It was a Sunday evening in late autumn. The air was crisp outside, but inside my parents' house, the atmosphere was thick with reverence. The dining room table, the one that sat beneath Alistair Finch's watchful eyes, was laden with my mother's best china and more food than we could possibly eat. Richard was at the head of the table, his natural throne. His wife, my Aunt Carol, sat beside him, preening under the attention. My parents flanked them, looking on with undisguised pride. "It's more than a building," Richard began, his voice dropping into the dramatic register he used for big announcements. He gestured to a sleek tablet, where an architectural rendering rotated slowly. It was a towering structure of twisted glass and aggressive angles, a shard of ice designed to pierce the clouds. "It's a statement. It's the future of this city's skyline, the Argent Tower." A chorus of oohs and ahs went around the table. My father beamed. "It's magnificent, Rich. Absolutely magnificent. A true landmark." My mother clasped her hands together. "Oh, Richard, it's just breathtaking. Where will it be?" Richard smiled, savoring the moment. We've just finalized the acquisition of the land, a prime piece of downtown real estate. We're clearing out that entire derelict section on the west side. You know the one, that crumbling old Haverford block. My stomach clenched. The Haverford block. I knew it intimately. It wasn't derelict. It was one of the last remaining examples of early 20th century artisan revival architecture in the city. A beautiful, cohesive block of brick buildings with intricate terracotta details, home to a dozen small legacy businesses, a bookbinder, a luthier, a family-run bakery that had been there for 3 generations. It was a pocket of living history, a place with a soul. I cleared my throat. The sound was small in the ocean of Richard's charisma. The Haverford block, I said. Uncle Richard, that block it's historically significant. The facades on those buildings are irreplaceable. Richard turned his gaze to me, his smile tightening almost imperceptibly. Evie, honey. Historically significant is a nice way of saying old and in the way. It's decay. It's holding the city back. Progress requires sacrifice. But it's not decay, I insisted, my voice gaining a little strength. It's a community. There are businesses there, people's livelihoods. The architectural integrity alone should qualify it for preservation. My father jumped in, his tone chiding. Evelyn, your uncle has teams of experts for this. Planners, engineers, they know what they're doing. Your job is about preserving paper in dusty boxes. Let the men who actually build things handle the real world. The sting of his words was sharp and familiar. Paper in dusty boxes. It was his go-to dismissal of my life's work. My mother added her own layer of sweet-venomed condescension. Darling, not everything old is worth saving. Sometimes you have to let go of the past to embrace the future. Your uncle is building our family's legacy, something that will last for 100 years. His legacy, I thought, a bitter taste in my mouth. A legacy built on the ashes of another. I looked from my mother's perfectly manicured disapproval to my father's blind adoration of his brother, and finally to Richard himself, who was looking at me with an expression of pity. It was the look that broke me. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was the calm, certain belief that my opinion, my entire profession, was utterly irrelevant. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it, Evie," he said, turning back to his adoring audience. "The future is coming, and it's going to be glorious." The conversation moved on, back to praising the tower's height, its luxury condos, its sky-high price tags. I sat in silence, pushing a piece of roast beef around my plate, the warmth of the room feeling suddenly cold and suffocating. The ghost of Alistair Finch stared down at me from the wall, and for the first time, I felt a strange kinship with his stern disapproval. I felt a slow, burning anger kindle in my chest, a feeling I had suppressed for far too long. They thought my world was small and insignificant, made of brittle paper and forgotten ink. They had no idea how powerful the past could be. The following Monday, I went to work with a new, grim sense of purpose. The city archive was my sanctuary, a vast, climate-controlled repository in the basement of City Hall. It smelled of old paper, leather, and time itself. The silence here wasn't empty. It was filled with the whispers of 1,000,000 different stories. Here, I wasn't the quiet niece or the sentimental dreamer. I was the guardian. I was the one who knew the secrets. Fueled by the lingering sting of my family's dismissal, I decided to dig into the Haverford block. It wasn't an official request. It was personal. I wanted to arm myself with undeniable facts, to build a fortress of evidence that even my uncle's charm and my family's willful ignorance couldn't breach. I started with the basics: zoning maps, property deeds, municipal surveys. I pulled the original plat maps from 1898, the delicate paper cracking at the edges. I cross-referenced them with the first development permits, issued in 1905. The name Alistair Finch kept appearing. Of course, I knew he had been a major developer in that era, but I hadn't realized the extent of his involvement in that specific area. He had purchased the entire block, not for a single grand project, but as a series of smaller parcels. The permits were for artisan workshops, storefronts with living quarters above, a public courtyard. It was a vision starkly different from his usual monolithic factories and grand commercial buildings. It was communal. I spent days tracing the path of ownership, the legal history of each lot. It was a tangled web. Some properties had been sold and resold, while others had remained under the ownership of a single holding company, Finch Legacy Properties, which had eventually been absorbed into my uncle's modern corporation. Everything seemed legally straightforward. His company had acquired the lots. They had the right to develop them. My heart sank. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was just a collection of old buildings with no real protection. But something nagged at me. The sheer coherence of the block's design, the unusual focus on artisan spaces. It felt deliberate, guided by a philosophy. It wasn't just a random assortment of buildings. I decided to look beyond the standard property and zoning files. I started digging into the more obscure collections, the ones most researchers overlooked. I pulled the records of the Civic Planning Board from the early 1900s, the minutes of the Merchants Guild, and finally, a series of boxes labeled Private Philanthropic Pacts and Endowments, 1900 to 1920. These boxes were the forgotten attic of the city's history. They were filled with the legal skeletons of vanity projects, failed charities, and endowment trusts that had long since run dry. Most of it was administrative dust. I spent hours sifting through brittle folders, my fingers stained with the grime of a century. My eyes were starting to blur, and a sense of defeat was creeping in. I was about to pack it in for the day when my hand brushed against something different at the bottom of a box. It wasn't a sheaf of thin, typed papers. It was a single heavy object. I lifted it out. It was a folio, bound in dark green leather, embossed with a simple gold crest I didn't recognize. There was no official city label on it, which was why it had likely been misfiled and forgotten. I carried it to my desk, my heart thumping with a strange premonition. I opened it carefully. The page wasn't paper. It was thick, creamy vellum, still supple after more than a century. The text was written in an elegant, flowing script, the ink a deep, rich sepia. The heading, in ornate calligraphy, read, "The Perpetual Preservation Charter for the Haverford Artisans Block." I felt a jolt, a sudden surge of adrenaline that cleared my fatigue. I read the first paragraph, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't a proposal or a letter of intent. It was a legally binding charter. It described the establishment of a land trust, dedicating the entire Haverford block not to commerce, not to profit, but to the perpetual cultivation and preservation of skilled craft, community, and the aesthetic dignity of the common man. It spoke of protecting the block from the transient whims of speculative development and ensuring it remained a haven for artisans in perpetuity. My eyes scanned the dense, legalistic text, a language I understood intimately. It detailed the creation of a trust fund to subsidize rents and finance the upkeep of the buildings. It laid out specific covenants restricting any alteration to the historical facades. It was an ironclad fortress of legal protection, built by someone who understood the law and wanted to create something that would last. Then I saw the signature at the bottom of the final page, next to the heavy, waxed seal of a notary and the official stamp of the city clerk's office, dated March 12, 1908. The signature was bold, decisive, and utterly unmistakable. I had seen it 1,000 times on company letterheads and framed documents. Alistair Finch, my great-great-grandfather. The man my uncle claimed to emulate. The patriarch whose portrait presided over our family gatherings. He hadn't just built the block. He had tried to protect it forever. He had created this shield to defend his vision against men exactly like his own great-grandson. I sat back in my chair, my mind reeling. A wave of triumphant, dizzying shock washed over me. This was it. This was the weapon. Richard's project was dead before the first brick was touched. But as I kept reading, my shock deepened into something far more profound. There was a final clause, a section titled Stewardship and Enforcement. It outlined the conditions under which the Charter's protective powers could be invoked or, under extreme circumstances, dissolved. My blood ran cold as I read the hyper-specific, almost prophetic language. The authority to enforce, enact, or petition for the dissolution of this charter, it read, shall be vested exclusively in a direct descendant of the signatory, Alistair Finch, who is, at the time of action, serving the city in an official, non-political capacity related to the curation, preservation, or administration of its civic history and records. I read the sentence again and again. A direct descendant, serving the city in a capacity related to the curation of its civic history and records. It couldn't be. It was too specific. It was impossible. It was a key forged 100 years ago, designed to fit a single, specific lock. My lock. I, Evelyn Finch, the quiet archivist, the keeper of dusty papers, was the sole steward of Alistair Finch's true legacy. The power to save the Haverford block, or to let it fall, rested entirely and exclusively with me. My family thought my job was a joke. My uncle thought I was an irrelevant sentimentalist. And our powerful, visionary ancestor had just handed me the authority to shatter his world. I held the charter in my hands, its weight feeling immense, terrifying, and absolutely glorious. For a full day, I did nothing. I kept the leather-bound charter locked in my personal cabinet at the archive, a secret source of terrifying power. The weight of it felt physical, a pressure in my chest. One part of me felt a wild, vindictive glee. I imagined the look on my uncle's face, on my parents' faces, when I revealed the truth. But another part of me was paralyzed by fear. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a declaration of war against my own family. I would be severing ties, burning bridges that, however flawed, had been the foundation of my entire life. Was I strong enough to do that, to stand completely alone? I knew I couldn't make this decision in a vacuum. I needed advice, not from a friend who would simply tell me what I wanted to hear, but from someone who understood the world I was about to step into. I thought of Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a retired legal counsel for the city, a lion of municipal law who had spent 40 years navigating the treacherous currents of politics and power. Now in his 70s, he volunteered at the archives twice a week, claiming that organizing old court dockets was more intellectually stimulating than golf. He was sharp, curmudgeonly, and had a deep, abiding respect for the historical record. I found him in the cartography section, meticulously cataloging a set of turn-of-the-century fire insurance maps. I asked if he had a moment, and he followed me to my small glass-walled office, his curiosity piqued by the gravity in my voice. I closed the door, took a deep breath, and laid the leather-bound charter on the table between us. "I found this yesterday," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It pertains to the Haverford block." Marcus put on his reading glasses and leaned forward, his practiced eyes scanning the vellum page. He was silent for a long time, his only movement the slight, rhythmic tapping of his finger against his chin. He read every word, his expression shifting from mild interest to focused intensity, and finally to slack-jawed astonishment. He looked up at me over the rim of his glasses, his eyes wide. "My God, Evelyn," he breathed. "Do you have any idea what this is?" "I think so," I said. "It's a preservation charter, signed by my great-great-grandfather." "It's more than that," he said, his voice electric with a lawyer's excitement for a beautiful, unassailable case. "This is a legal fortress, a perpetual land trust with protective covenants that are written into the very DNA of the property. These covenants supersede subsequent zoning ordinances. They likely even supersede eminent domain, given the civic endowment language. Alistair Finch didn't just want to protect this block. He wanted to make it legally untouchable." He flipped to the last page and read the stewardship clause. He read it twice, then slowly took off his glasses and stared at me. A slow smile spread across his face. "Well, I'll be damned," he said softly. "He wrote it for you." "It's really valid?" I asked, needing to hear it from him. "After all this time?" "Valid?" Marcus chuckled, a dry, rusty sound. "Evelyn, this document is an anvil, and your uncle is about to drive his very expensive, very fragile sports car directly into it. The language is precise, the notarization is impeccable, and the legal framework it establishes is sound. But you need to understand something. He leaned forward, his expression turning serious. Invoking this won't be a friendly chat over coffee. Your uncle's company has millions, possibly hundreds of millions, tied up in this project. They will not go down without a fight. They will try to intimidate you, discredit you, bury you in legal fees. This will be war. Are you ready for that? His question hung in the air, demanding an answer I wasn't sure I had. Was I ready for war? With the man who was the pillar of my family? With my own parents? I looked at the charter, at Alistair Finch's bold signature. He had placed this power, this responsibility, in the hands of a future descendant he could only imagine. He had trusted that person to have the courage to honor his vision. My family saw me as weak, sentimental, and stuck in the past. But maybe, just maybe, being stuck in the past was exactly what the present needed. Yes, I said, the word feeling more solid, more real than I expected. I think I am. Marcus nodded slowly, a look of profound respect in his eyes. Good. Then let's plan your first move. We don't lead with the cannon. We start with a warning shot. Following Marcus's advice, I chose a path of deliberate, bureaucratic precision. I wasn't going to call my uncle or stage a dramatic family confrontation. I was going to use the very system they dismissed as plotting and irrelevant. I drafted a formal letter on official city archives letterhead. It was a masterpiece of neutral yet menacing officialese. It was a notice of historical significance review, addressed to the CEO of Finch Development Corporation. The letter stated that a recently discovered historical document had come to the attention of the archives, suggesting that the properties collectively known as the Haverford Block were subject to previously unknown preservation covenants. It informed them that, pending a full legal review by the city, any and all pre-development activity, including applications for demolition permits, should be halted. It was polite, professional, and utterly non-negotiable. I signed it with my full name and my official title, Evelyn Finch, Chief City Archivist. The act of signing my name, my own name, above that title, felt like clicking a weapon into place. I sent it via certified mail. The silence lasted for exactly 48 hours. Then, my personal cell phone rang. The caller ID read, Uncle Richard. My heart hammered against my ribs. I took a deep breath and answered. Evelyn, he said. There was no greeting. His voice was laced with a kind of weary amusement, like a king dealing with a troublesome but ultimately harmless court jester. I got your little letter. Very official looking. You're really leaning into this whole city bureaucrat thing, aren't you? Hello, Uncle Richard, I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. I assume you're calling about the notice regarding the Haverford Block? The notice? He laughed, a short barking sound. Evie, what is this? Are you playing office? Is this some kind of game? It's cute, really, but you need to leave the real work to the adults now. I don't know what dusty old paper you think you found, but I have a $100 million project on the line and a team of the best lawyers in the state. They will sweep this little misunderstanding away like a piece of lint. So do us both a favor and drop it. Don't embarrass yourself. Cute. The word landed like a slap. Embarrass yourself. He wasn't angry. He wasn't threatened. He was just patronizing. He still saw me as little Evie, playing with her storybooks in the corner while the grown-ups talked business. His absolute, unshakable condescension was more infuriating than any threat. It wasn't just about the buildings anymore. It wasn't even just about Alistair's legacy. It was about the decades of being patted on the head, of having my passions belittled, of being told to not worry my pretty little head. It's not a misunderstanding, Uncle Richard, I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. It's an official review from a city department, my department. I would advise you to have your lawyers read the notice very carefully, and I suggest you take it very, very seriously. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. I had surprised him. His tone shifted, the amusement replaced by a flicker of irritation. Listen to me, Evelyn. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you are playing with fire. You are a Finch. Don't you dare stand in the way of this family's progress. The notice stands, I said, and before he could respond, I ended the call. My hand was shaking, but a fierce, exhilarating energy surged through me. The warning shot had been fired, and he had completely, utterly underestimated its power. This was his fatal mistake. I didn't have to wait long for the repercussions. My uncle, true to form, didn't escalate things legally at first. He went for the emotional jugular. He called my parents. The summons came that evening. It was my mother on the phone, her voice tight with a forced, brittle cheerfulness that always signaled trouble. "Evelyn, darling, your father and I were hoping you could pop over for a bit. There's something we need to discuss." It wasn't a request. I drove to my parents' house, a familiar dread coiling in my stomach. When I walked in, the scene was set for an ambush. My father and mother were sitting in the formal living room, the one reserved for important guests and serious conversations. The air was thick with tension. My uncle was nowhere to be seen, but his presence was a palpable force in the room. "Evelyn, sit down," my father said, gesturing to the armchair opposite them. His voice was heavy with disappointment. I sat, my back straight, my hands folded in my lap. I felt like a child being called to the principal's office. My mother began, her voice quivering with carefully rehearsed emotion. "We had a call from your uncle today. He's very upset, Evelyn. He told us about this letter, this ridiculous blockade you're trying to put up." "It's not ridiculous, Mom," I said calmly. "It's my job. I have a fiduciary duty to the city and its historical assets." "Your job?" My father scoffed, his face flushing with anger. "Your job is to file papers. Your uncle is building a legacy for this family. He is providing for all of us, for your future, for the future of your cousins. What you are doing is not a job, it's sabotage. It's insubordination. He is the head of this family in all but name," my mother added, her voice rising. "And you, his niece, are trying to publicly humiliate him, to jeopardize his life's work. Why? Why would you do this to him? To us?" Her eyes narrowed, and the accusation I had been waiting for finally came. "Is it jealousy? Is that what this is all about? Because he's so successful and you're just cataloging things in a basement?" The accusation hung in the air, ugly and familiar. For years, they had interpreted my different path not as a choice, but as a failure. And now, they were casting my professional integrity as a petty, emotional tantrum. "This has nothing to do with jealousy," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "This is about a legally binding document that protects that block. A document signed by Alistair Finch himself." My father waved a dismissive hand. "Alistair, don't you dare hide behind his name. Alistair was a builder, a man of action. He would be championing Richard, not standing with you and your sentimental nonsense about old bricks." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. They were defending a man's legacy by advocating for the complete destruction of his most cherished, protected project. They were praising Alistair's vision while spitting on his explicit, legally enshrined last wishes. "You don't understand," I said, my voice pleading for the last time. "The law is on my side." "We don't care about the law," my mother cried, her composure finally cracking. "We care about this family, and you are tearing it apart. Richard has done so much for you, for all of us. He helped with the down payment on your apartment, didn't he? He's always remembered your birthday. And this is how you repay him?" They were rewriting history, twisting acts of casual, wealthy benevolence into a debt I was now being called to repay with my silence and submission. The emotional blackmail was suffocating. I felt the old, familiar urge to shrink, to apologize, to make myself small to smooth things over. But then I thought of the charter, of Alistair's faith. I thought of my uncle's condescending voice on the phone calling my life's work cute. I stood up. My legs felt surprisingly steady. "I'm sorry you see it that way," I said, my voice devoid of the emotion they were trying to provoke. "But my decision is final. The review will proceed. If Uncle Richard has a problem with it, he can address it through the proper legal channels with the city, not by using you to try and bully me." My mother gasped, genuinely shocked by my defiance. My father's face was a mask of thunderous rage. "You walk out that door, Evelyn," he said, his voice low and threatening, "and you are choosing a piece of paper over your own family. No, I replied, looking him straight in the eye. I'm choosing my integrity. Maybe it's time you all tried to understand what that word means. I turned and walked out of the house, the sound of my mother bursting into tears following me down the hallway. The door closed behind me with a soft, final click, shutting out the world I had always known. I stood on the porch in the cool night air, shaking and alone. But for the first time in my life, I felt truly, unshakably, my own person. The days that followed were a trial by ice. The family's pressure campaign escalated from emotional blackmail to a chilling, coordinated freeze-out. My calls to my parents went to voicemail. My friendly texts to my cousins were met with silence or short, sharp replies telling me I should be ashamed of myself. An aunt sent me a long, sanctimonious email about the importance of family loyalty, thinly veiling a threat about being written out of the family narrative entirely. It was a lonely, isolating experience. The silence from people who had been a constant presence in my life was a heavy, deafening roar. Uncle Richard, meanwhile, had moved on to the next phase of his attack. I started receiving letters from his lawyers. They were dense with legal threats, accusing me of tortious interference, abuse of my civic position, and acting in bad faith. They demanded I retract the notice immediately or face a lawsuit that would not only cost me my job, but would mire me in personal financial ruin. The words were designed to terrify, and they worked. Doubt, cold and insidious, began to creep back in. Was I being selfish? Was I misinterpreting everything? Was I, a humble archivist, really capable of taking on a corporate titan and my own family? Was I about to lose everything for a block of buildings? Feeling the walls closing in, I knew I needed to reconnect with the reason I was doing this. I needed to feel the history I was fighting for. That Saturday, I drove downtown to the Haverford block. I parked my car a few streets away and walked, wanting to approach it slowly. As I turned the corner, the block came into view, a warm, harmonious stretch of reddish-brown brick in the cool morning light. It was an island of human scale and intricate beauty in a sea of bland, modern towers. I ran my hand over the cool, rough texture of the bricks, tracing the lines of the mortar. I looked up at the detailed terracotta friezes above the shop windows, depictions of artisans at work, a baker with a loaf of bread, a weaver at a loom, a blacksmith with a hammer. These weren't just decorations. They were a mission statement carved in stone. Alistair hadn't just built structures. He had celebrated the people within them. I walked down the quiet street, the sound of my footsteps echoing softly. Most of the shops were still closed, but a warm, delicious scent wafted from one of them. Fresh bread. The sign above the door, painted in faded gold leaf, read, Gable's Bakery. Since 1909, a light was on inside. On an impulse, I pushed the door open. A small bell chimed. The woman behind the counter was elderly, with flour dusting her apron and kind, crinkled eyes. "We're not quite open yet, dear," she said, her voice warm, "but you look like you could use a coffee." "I don't want to be a bother," I started. "Nonsense. The pot's fresh," she insisted, pouring a cup and sliding it across the worn wooden counter. "I'm Martha Gable." "Evelyn," I said, omitting my last name. I took a sip of the coffee. It was strong and perfect. "Your family has been here a long time." "Fourth generation," she said with a proud smile. "My great-grandfather opened this shop. He knew the man who built this whole block, Mr. Finch. The original Mr. Finch, that is." My heart skipped a beat. "Really? What did he say about him?" "Oh, he said he was a tough old bird, a real industrialist," she recalled, her eyes looking into the past. "But he had a soft spot for craftsmen. He believed that a city's soul wasn't in its big banks or factories, but in the hands of the people who made beautiful, useful things. He set up this whole block as a sort of sanctuary for us. My great-grandfather said Mr. Finch told him, 'I want this place to stand for 100 years, a testament to skill over scale.'" She sighed, her smile fading. "I guess 100 years is all we get." Her eyes drifted towards the window, towards the distant gleam of a new skyscraper. "You've heard about the new tower they want to build here?" she asked, her voice quiet. I nodded. "I have. We've all gotten the notices. They're buying us out, offering us a pittance for a lifetime of work, for a century of history. They call it progress. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a deep, weary sadness. It just feels like erasure, like we don't matter. Like this place, this history, it's all worthless. Her words struck me with the force of a physical blow. It feels like erasure. That was it. That was what my family had done to me my entire life. They had tried to erase my passions, my profession, my identity, because it didn't fit their definition of worth. I wasn't just fighting for old bricks or a legal document. I was fighting for Martha Gable. I was fighting for the luthier and the bookbinder. I was fighting for the simple, profound idea that a person's worth and a place's worth isn't determined by the highest bidder. I finished my coffee, the warmth spreading through my chest, extinguishing the last embers of my doubt. I looked at this kind woman, a stranger who had shown me more understanding in 10 minutes than my family had in 40 years. Maybe it's not over yet, I said, a new certainty in my voice. Maybe this place matters more than they think. Mrs. Gable gave me a small, hopeful smile. From your lips to God's ears, dear. I left the bakery and walked back down the street, but this time my steps were firm. My purpose was clear. I was no longer just the archivist. I was the guardian of the Haverford Artisans block, and the war Marcus had warned me about. I was finally ready to fight it. The meeting was set on my uncle's terms, in his arena. The boardroom of Finch Development Corporation was a temple of modern power, located on the top floor of his current flagship skyscraper. One entire wall was a sheet of glass, offering a godlike view of the city below. The Haverford block was a tiny, insignificant patch from this height. The table was a massive slab of polished granite, cold and imposing. The air smelled of expensive leather and ambition. I walked in with Marcus at my side. He wasn't officially acting as my lawyer to avoid any conflict of interest claims, but as a consultant to the city archives, an expert witness on historical documents. His presence alone was a statement, solid, serious, and unimpeachable. Across the table sat the enemy. Uncle Richard was at the head, leaning back in his high-backed leather chair, radiating smug confidence. To his right was his lead counsel, a sharp-suited man named Harrison Croft, flanked by two junior lawyers who were busy setting up a projector. To Richard's left, to my utter dismay, sat my parents. My mother gave me a brief, pleading look. My father refused to meet my eyes, his jaw set in a line of grim disapproval. They weren't there for me. They were there as a silent jury, ready to witness my final public humiliation. Evelyn, Marcus, Richard began, his tone magnanimous, as if welcoming them to a friendly negotiation. Thank you for coming. I'm hoping we can clear up this little administrative hiccup quickly and efficiently so we can all get back to our real work. Mr. Croft took that as his cue. He launched into a slick, condescending presentation. He brought up slides showing zoning laws, recent municipal ordinances, and precedents for urban redevelopment. He spoke of blight, of economic revitalization, of the overwhelming public good the Argent Tower would represent. He was smooth, professional, and utterly dismissive of my claim. While the city's commitment to its history is admirable, Croft said, directing a thin smile at me, it cannot and does not supersede the pressing economic and developmental needs of a modern metropolis. The document in question, which we have yet to be allowed to examine, is undoubtedly a historical curiosity, but it has no legal standing in the 21st century. He then moved to the final slide, titled, A Gesture of Goodwill. However, Croft continued, in the spirit of partnership and in recognition of Ms. Finch's personal interest. In this matter, Finch Development is prepared to make a substantial, 7-figure donation to the City Historical Society. This donation can be used to create a new wing, perhaps even named after the Finch family, to house and display artifacts from the city's past. The offer hung in the air, a breathtakingly arrogant piece of bribery. They weren't just trying to buy the block, they were trying to buy me, to buy history itself, packaging it as a generous gift. My uncle looked at me, a triumphant glint in his eye. He thought he had me. He thought my sentimental little cause had a price tag, and he had just met it. My mother was nodding eagerly, as if to say, "See, Evelyn? Take the deal. Everyone wins, ... I felt a profound, icy calm settle over me. All the fear, all the doubt was gone. I looked at Mr. Croft, then at my uncle. "Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Croft," I said, my voice clear and steady, echoing slightly in the vast room, "and for your generous offer. However, it will not be necessary." I turned to Marcus, who gave me a subtle nod. I took out a flash drive from my bag and handed it to one of the junior lawyers. "If you could please put this on the screen. It's a high-resolution scan of the document in question." The lawyer, looking to Croft for permission, took the drive and clicked a few buttons. The slick corporate presentation vanished, replaced by the warm, creamy vellum of the charter. The elegant 100-year-old script filled the screen. I stood up. I didn't need notes. The words were etched into my memory. "This," I announced, "is the Perpetual Preservation Charter for the Haverford Artisans Block, signed and notarized on March 12, 1908. It is not a letter of intent or a sentimental promise. It is a legally binding land trust." Croft squinted at the screen. Richard leaned forward, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "As you can see," I continued, pointing to a section on the screen, "it establishes protective covenants that are, and I quote, perpetual and unbreakable, affixed to the land itself, not to its temporary owners." Croft let out a small, derisive laugh. "Ms. Finch, with all due respect, a century-old private agreement doesn't just nullify decades of established property and zoning law. It's a historical artifact, not an active injunction." This was Marcus's cue. He cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. When Marcus Thorne spoke, people listened. "On the contrary, Mr. Croft," Marcus said, his voice calm and authoritative. "Our analysis, and I assure you it has been thorough, confirms that this charter establishes what is known as a charitable trust with a conservation easement in perpetuity. Under state law, such instruments, particularly those established for clear and ongoing public benefit, have an exceptionally strong standing. They are designed specifically to withstand the shifting winds of zoning and speculative interests. The language here is impeccable. This charter does not just have standing, it is the highest law governing that specific parcel of land." I watched as Croft's face changed. The confident smirk faltered. He was leaning closer to the screen, his eyes scanning the text with frantic speed. The junior lawyers were whispering to each other. They were seeing it. The legal fortress. Richard, however, was not a lawyer. He was a force of nature who bent the world to his will. He slammed his hand down on the granite table. The sound cracked through the room. "This is absurd," he roared, his face turning a blotchy red. "It's a piece of paper, a relic. Who signed it? Some long-dead idealist?" I let the silence hang for a moment before answering. I pointed to the bottom of the screen, where the bold, familiar signature was magnified to a massive size. "He wasn't just some idealist, Uncle Richard," I said softly. "He was your great-grandfather, Alistair Finch." A collective gasp went through the room. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stared at the screen, then at Richard, his face a canvas of pure confusion. Richard was speechless, his jaw working but no words coming out. He looked at the signature, the foundation of his own myth, now being used as a weapon against him. He finally found his voice, sputtering with rage. This is a betrayal! He would have wanted this! He would have wanted progress!" "Would he?" I asked, my voice still quiet, cutting through his fury. "Because he seemed to go to extraordinary lengths to prevent exactly this kind of progress. But you're right, in a way. The charter isn't fully active, it has to be invoked. Which brings us to the final clause." I directed the lawyer to zoom in on the last paragraph, the stewardship and enforcement clause. "Please read it, Mr. Croft," I said. Croft, his face now pale, read the words aloud in a strained monotone. "The authority to enforce, enact, or petition for the dissolution of this charter shall be vested exclusively in a direct descendant of the signatory, Alistair Finch, who is, at the time of action, serving the city in an official, non-political capacity related to the curation, preservation, or administration of its civic history and records." He finished reading and looked up, the full, catastrophic weight of the sentence finally landing on everyone in the room. The silence was absolute. It was a silence so deep I could hear the hum of the building's ventilation system. Croft slowly lowered his head, defeated. My father looked as though he'd been punched in the gut. My mother was staring at me, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. And Richard. Richard's face was a storm of disbelief, rage, and utter humiliation. He looked at me, truly seeing me for the first time in his life, not as his quiet niece, but as the one person on earth who held absolute power over his dreams. I let the moment stretch, letting them all absorb the beautiful, inescapable irony of it. Then, I delivered the final blow. "Uncle Richard," I said, my voice resonating with an authority they had never heard from me before. "I am Evelyn Finch. I am a direct descendant of Alistair Finch, and I am the chief city archivist." I paused, letting the pieces click into place in their minds. "Your great-grandfather, the man whose legacy you claim to carry, saw a future where men like you might exist, and he took steps to stop it. He entrusted that power to a future guardian. He entrusted it to me, and as the sole enforcer of this charter, I am hereby officially invoking its full and total protection over the Haverford Artisans block. Your project is over." Richard shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "You're doing this out of spite," he bellowed, his voice cracking. "You were always jealous, a bitter, jealous little girl." I looked him in the eye, feeling no fear, no anger, only a profound sense of peace. "No, Uncle," I said calmly. "I'm doing this because it's my job. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. And I'm doing it to honor his legacy." I gestured to Alistair's signature, glowing on the screen like a verdict. His real one, not the monument to your ego you tried to build in its place. With that, I picked up my bag. Marcus stood with me. We turned and walked toward the door, leaving utter devastation in our wake. We didn't look back. We didn't need to. We could feel the collapse of their world behind us. The elevator ride down from the top floor was silent. I stood beside Marcus, watching the city rise up to meet us as we descended. My body was thrumming with adrenaline, a strange electric vibration under my skin. I felt both exhausted and more alive than I had ever been. When the doors opened onto the vast marble lobby, we walked out into the afternoon sun. The air had never tasted so sweet. We found a small, anonymous coffee shop a few blocks away. As I sat down, the shaking started, my hands trembling as the adrenaline began to recede. Marcus ordered 2 coffees and slid one across the table to me. "You did it, kid," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You faced the dragon in its own den, and you didn't even flinch. I've seen seasoned litigators with less nerve than you showed up there." I was terrified, I admitted, wrapping my cold hands around the warm cup. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," he said, quoting some old adage. "It's acting in spite of it. And what you did up there, that was courage." Just then, my phone, which I had put on silent, began to vibrate violently on the table. The screen lit up with a text from my cousin. "What did you do? Richard is losing his mind." Then another. "Mom said you ruined everything." A missed call from my mother, then another. I looked at the phone buzzing frantically, a beacon of my family's implosion. Without a second thought, I picked it up and held down the power button until the screen went black. I slid the dark, silent rectangle back into my purse. The sense of peace that washed over me was immediate and profound. Within days, the story broke. A savvy reporter at the city's main newspaper got a tip, probably from a disgruntled employee in my uncle's company, and the headline was explosive. "Gilded Age Charter Halts Billion-Dollar Argent Tower Development. City Archivist Revealed as Descendant with Sole Power." The narrative was irresistible. A David and Goliath tale. A quiet scholar using ancient history to stop a rapacious modern developer. I was cast as the heroine, the unlikely guardian of the city's soul. My office was flooded with interview requests, which I politely declined through the city's press office. I had no interest in fame. I only wanted the work to be done. A week after the boardroom confrontation, I was working late at the archive, cataloging the charter and preparing it for secure, permanent storage, when I heard a soft knock on my office door. It was Martha Gable, the baker from the Haverford block. She was holding a large white pastry box tied with string. Her eyes were shining with tears. "I saw the news," she said, her voice thick. "I saw your picture, Evelyn Finch. I should have known. You have your great-great-grandfather's eyes." I stood up, unsure of what to say. "Mrs. Gable?" She walked forward and set the box on my desk. "We all saw it, the whole block. We couldn't believe it. We thought we were lost. We knew someone was looking out for us, but we never imagined it was an angel from the archives." She reached out and took my hands in her warm, flower-dusted ones. "Thank you, Evelyn. You didn't just save our buildings. You saved our homes, our history. You saved us." I felt my own eyes well up. Her simple, heartfelt gratitude was more validating than any headline, more meaningful than any victory. It was the human connection that had been missing from my life for so long. We stood there for a moment, two women connected by a man's century-old vision. I had fought for her, and in doing so, I had found my own community, my own chosen family. The inevitable approach from my parents came a few days later. It was a phone call from my mother. Her voice was subdued, stripped of its usual authority. "Evelyn," she began, "your father and we've been talking. We had no idea about that paper. We feel just terrible about how things happened." I waited, saying nothing. The apology felt hollow, a prelude to a request. "It's just that Richard is so devastated," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "His investors are furious. His reputation is in tatters. We were just thinking, now that you've made your point, maybe there's a compromise? Some way to let him save face? Perhaps allow a smaller development on a part of the block?" I closed my eyes. They still didn't get it. After everything, they still didn't understand. Their primary concern wasn't for my integrity or for the history I had protected or for the vicious way they had treated me. It was for Richard, for his feelings, his reputation, his money. They weren't apologizing for their actions, they were trying to manage the consequences of mine. "No, Mom," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "There is no compromise." "But, Evelyn, family—" "I need some space," I interrupted, establishing a boundary for the first time in our lives. "From you, from Dad, from all of it. We can talk again when you're ready to understand what I did and why I did it, not just how it's inconveniencing Uncle Richard." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with her shock, but for once, it wasn't my responsibility to fill it. "I have to go," I said. "Goodbye, Mom." And I hung up, ending the conversation on my own terms. A year can change everything. Standing at the entrance to the Haverford block a year after that fateful meeting, the transformation was breathtaking. The story of the charter had breathed new life into the old street. With the threat of demolition gone and the media spotlight shining brightly, the block had been officially designated a city, state, and national historic landmark. The long-dormant trust fund established by Alistair Finch had been located, its century of accrued interest amounting to a small fortune. That money was now being used exactly as he had intended, to restore the beautiful terracotta facades, to repoint the old brickwork, and to subsidize the rents for the artisan tenants. Gable's Bakery was thriving, with a new generation of Gables learning the trade. The bookbinder had a waiting list months long. A new generation of artisans, a glassblower, a young ceramicist, had moved into the newly restored workshops. The block was more than saved. It was reborn, a vibrant living testament to a vision of community and craft. At the entrance to the central courtyard, a small, elegant bronze plaque had been installed. It read, "The Haverford Artisans Block." Preserved for the future through the vision of Alistair Finch and the stewardship of the city archives. My name wasn't on it, and I preferred it that way. My contribution was woven into the fabric of the place itself. My own life had been reborn too. I was no longer the quiet, overlooked archivist. I had become a respected voice for preservation in the city, appointed to the Landmarks Commission. I was more confident, more at peace with who I was. The need for my family's approval, A weight I had carried for 40 years had simply vanished. My relationship with my parents was a quiet, fragile thing. We spoke occasionally, the conversations polite and strained. They had, over many months, offered clumsy apologies, but the deep chasm of understanding between us remained. They mourned the loss of the family's golden boy, the shattering of the hierarchy they held so dear. I had learned to accept that they might never truly comprehend my world or my choices. The old, painful dynamic was broken for good, and in its place was a respectful distance. It was not the warm family I had once craved, but it was honest, and that was enough. I saw Uncle Richard only once during that year. It was at a city charity gala, an event I now attended as a commission member. He looked smaller. The swagger was gone, replaced by a weary caution. His new projects were modest, his star greatly diminished. He saw me across the room and, to my surprise, made his way over. He stood before me, holding a drink, avoiding my eyes. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low. He didn't apologize. I never expected him to. Men like Richard don't apologize. They recalibrate. "I've been reading about Alistair," he said unexpectedly. "Not the business journals, his personal letters. Your archives have them online." I just nodded, waiting. "He was a stubborn man," Richard continued, swirling the ice in his glass. "Idealistic. Thought he could stop the world from changing?" He finally looked at me, a flicker of something. Not quite respect, but a kind of grudging acknowledgement in his eyes. "Looks like it runs in the family." It was the closest he would ever come to admitting defeat, to admitting I was a part of that same lineage. I simply nodded once, accepting the meager offering for what it was. I didn't need his validation anymore. My worth wasn't in his hands. It never had been. "Yes," I said, "it does." And with a polite smile, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the crowd. Looking back on it all now, I realized the most valuable thing I discovered in that dusty archive wasn't the charter. It was myself. I learned that legacy isn't something you build with steel and glass to impress the world. It's the principles you stand for, the history you honor, the community you protect. I learned that your value isn't determined by the people who overlook you, but by your own integrity. And I learned that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's the people who see you for who you truly are and stand with you. A baker with flour on her hands, a grumpy old lawyer, and the quiet whispers of history itself. Thank you so much for joining me and listening to my story. I'm sure many of you have faced your own battles, big or small, where you had to fight to be seen and heard. I would be so honored if you shared a piece of your own story in the comments below. Have you ever been underestimated only to prove everyone wrong? Let's fill the comments with our collective strength. Don't forget to like this video if my journey resonated with you, and please subscribe to the channel for more stories about finding your power in the most unexpected places. Remember, sometimes the quietest voices have the most important things to say. Thank you for listening. I wish you all strength on your own journeys.